Yeah.
So we're back.
Yep.
Coalition Purple. Hey, how is it out on the farm? Is it a little cooler?
Oh my God. I was just, I mean, this is totally nothing to do with anything, but, we were talking a little bit about this yesterday about some of the things I'm always building in my backyard. During the heat wave,
Oh my
I
gosh.
was out there for like 5 minutes and then I'd have to take a break. And then another 5 minutes and have to, it
No.
was so hot. It's like, couldn't even function. It was crazy.
I
Definitely the
know.
hottest it's been since I've lived in North County.
Yeah. No, it was really unbelievable. I mean, we've had our occasional hot day here or there, but to have it for so long, we're just we're weather wimps to begin with. So
Yeah, sure.
when something like that happens, it's like, yeah, yeah. But anyways, so what's heating up other than that?
Well, to pick up because we were talking a little bit yesterday and sort of pick up on that, because Linda's been thinking about this, this morning, and we've been talking about it. And it's really the idea of, um, how our democracy functions as it's currently laid out. And mostly focused on the idea that you have the two political parties, but those two political parties are private organizations. And so, therefore, they have the right to sort of decide how they conduct things, how the primaries go, who the candidates are going to be. But my thinking on it, and I think Linda agrees with me on this too, is that they're more than just your normal private organization. They're the gatekeepers to our democracy. If they refuse to function in a democratic way and they sort of forego their sacred trust to protect democracy itself by, having fair elections, having primaries, having candidates that we can have faith in and have trust in, if they just are going to toss that aside, and of course the Democrat Party this time around is the big, um, really the big purveyor of that particular problem. But that's not to
Right,
say that the Republican Party can't do exactly the same thing. Again, both private
right.
organizations. But I think as a country, we need to seriously consider if these two parties are not willing to stand up and protect our democracy, then maybe it's just time for them to go just in general.
Right. Yeah. No, and it is. It's one of those weird things until you start talking about it and think the whole political process is driven by private interests,
Right.
which they are. I mean, they have become kind of the oligarchs
Yeah.
of the political process. To kind of link it to Russia and all the weird stuff that goes on there. And again, I'm not saying that it's necessarily that nefarious, but those things reward to get done. They're private organizations and they're going to do whatever it takes to stay in power,
Right.
regardless of what the consequences are for the country as a whole. And all the more reason that we keep beating on this drum of having, at a minimum, at least one more political party, if not
Right.
several.
Because I think, part of the problem is, I think there are a lot of people, Democrats in this country, who look at what's gone on with the Democrat primary this year around and the swapping out of candidates and the fact that they didn't really have a primary and just the fact that actually no one has ever really voted for Kamala Harris. They look at that and they see it as problematic. But then they say, well, I hate the Republicans so much, I'm still going to vote for the
Right.
Democrats. But that essentially gives them a pass to just foist candidates upon us from here until the end of time. And if you
Yep.
had more options, you could say, look, okay, the Democrats have lost it. It's done. They're not conducting themselves in a democratic manner anymore. They're taking away our opportunity to choose our candidates. I'm going to go and vote for this other party over here. They have similar views, but they're more open and have better integrity about their, election processes and things like that. You could do that. You could essentially promote a minor party to be a major party and demote the major party back into being a minor party. But because the parties that do exist out there have been such failed entities for so long and they represent so few people, and so few people are willing to go along with those parties and really take advantage of their existence, something has got to change in that respect. We have to have a party that's generally acceptable to the mass of the population so that when things like this do happen, you can send the message that it's not acceptable for the gatekeepers of our democracy to simply toss democracy aside. It can never
Right.
work that way.
Yeah, right. Well, and like we've talked about a bunch of times, but I think we have to repeat over and over and over and over again is the fact that if you add up all the moderates in both parties, let alone all the independents,
Yeah.
the number of people that is huge. It's
Yeah.
bigger than any of the Republicans or Democrats in terms of that the party. And as we've also repeated a bunch of times, but have to keep repeating, is and I know I hear this all the time. I'm sure you do too. And I'm actually hearing it more and more through this election cycle. Is people are so frustrated that the fringes are basically kind of running the joint here, and the vast majority of people want something in the middle,
Yeah.
something that let's be reasonable. We want as we've talked about, something that's more financially conservative but socially liberal, as we've talked about in the point. I mean, that's the vast majority of people,
Yeah.
and they're not being represented well by either party. So the only way, and I just had this discussion last night after we all got together, that you know if you continue to complain about whatever the topic is or the party system, but then continue to vote for the same list of people, what do you expect to happen? And I know you've said that a million times as well, right? I mean, and it's so true. It's the whole definition of crazy. You keep doing the same thing over and over, and you think there's going to be different results. No, there's not.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that I'm going to start promoting just as a general idea is that everybody out there who hears this, or anyone who has a conscience about, the decline of our political situation, I think people need to just start registering as decline to state, no political preference, or register for a third party or whatever. But I think we need to get to the point where the country as a whole can look at the status of registration of the population and say, if less than half of the people in the country are registered as, Republicans and Democrats combined. So let's say all of the options other than Democrat or Republican make up greater than 50% of the electorate. I think that sends a huge message. If we can just keep unregistering people from the two major parties, you can still
Right.
vote the way you want, whatever you decide,
Exactly.
do
No.
whatever.
Yeah.
But
No. Absolutely. And I mean, even here in the left coast of California, um, independence, though no political preference,
yeah,
party preference, is larger already than the Republican Party.
right.
And so people are obviously dissatisfied. So now it's just you got to take the next step, and that's why I keep coming back with the presidential election. There's so much focus on the presidential election all the time, which I'm not saying it's not an important election,
Mhm.
but in the big scheme of things, where so much of the action happens is at the state level and the local level, or within Congress. And presidents, yes, they have some power, but they can't do anything major, really. But yet we put so much focus on that, and it's
Yeah.
like this is the perfect election. Again, I had this discussion last night too. This is the perfect election because everybody's freaking out. Whether you're a Democrat, you're afraid Trump's going to get elected, or vice versa, right?
Right.
People are freaking out, and it's like that's fine to have those concerns. If I guess if you were in one of the 4 or 5 swing states,
Mhm.
but anywhere else, it doesn't matter. And it's like now is the time to register that vote to say I'm not going to vote for either one of these people. And if
Yeah.
enough of those start, it sends the signal because it's not going to impact anything. Here in California, Kamala's going to win. In
Yeah.
Alabama, Trump is going to win, no
Right.
matter what is going to happen. It's already done. So let's focus on the fact this is our chance, regardless of party,
Yep. Yeah.
to register. I mean, to vote when it comes to presidential, in particular. Vote for yourself. I mean, vote for anybody besides those two, just to send it. You got to start somewhere.
Right. And that's what I say. I think, and just to give another option. Even if you wanted to vote for one of the two candidates this time
Yeah.
around, fine. But unregister from the two major parties.
Yep.
Send the message that what the parties are doing is not acceptable. And, show the country so that everyone can take a step back and look and say, look, the largest group of people in the country, more than half of the people in the country are now saying that they don't want to be part of either of these two parties.
Yep.
And that sends the message that now is the time to create something new or create multiple somethings new. I
Right.
mean, even if you had, 5 or 6 working parties, like you could create something new, which I think is important because I believe there's a whole bunch of people in this country that aren't really represented by anyone or anything.
Exactly.
But at the same time that you're creating that, if you elevated, say, the Greens and the Libertarians to a more respectable level,
Right.
then now you, in a sense, have 5 parties. You have the Greens, the Libertarians, which are actual
Right.
viable parties. You have the new party, which is, a viable party and could maybe even be the largest party at some point. And the Republicans and the Democrats would still be out there representing whatever the hell it is that they think that they represent at this point. But you would actually have choices, and it wouldn't be like this calamity. And again, I go back again to what I've been looking at with the Democrats and how they run their primary. The calamity is if the Democrats decide that they don't want to be involved in democracy anymore, there's nowhere to go.
Right.
We're just absolutely screwed. So we need to do something so that there are options. So when one of these big parties decides that they're going to go off the rails, everyone can say, "Okay, you want to go off the rails? Fine. I'll deal with these other parties that share some of my views. Have similar ideas to some things or disagree with some things." But it's this thing where you have to do one or the other, and the two options are polar opposites of each other, at least in theory, but they're really
Right.
not.
No.
But it can't go on where there's no choices, because our choices, again, I would say for this election, this is the perfect election to talk about how our choices are dwindling. We didn't have choices in the
Yep.
primaries, and now we're faced with this terrible choice in the presidential election. And also, I just want to say, because I do talk about presidential policy, because I think it's a good exemplar of where things are going. But you're right about the elections within the states and the local
Right.
elections too. It'd be so important to have more options in more places. And, we got to start changing laws, changing the ways things are funded, changing the way we look at things so that we actually can have viable alternatives. So we're not stuck in this situation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the thing that's mind-boggling to me, coming back to the whole electoral college and all, which again, that's not going to change probably in our lifetime,
Right.
just because of how complicated that would be. But the fact of the matter that there's only 5 or 6 swing states, in my
Mm.
mind, if you do what you're suggesting, all 50 states should be swing states.
Right.
Yeah, I
Exactly.
mean, every state should be there. It shouldn't be a foregone conclusion that it goes one way or the other depending on the state. And I mean, that's the ultimate goal. You want every state to be a swing state.
Right.
And you start with a very simple step that I love your suggestion is just don't register for either the two major parties and send that message. That's the way we're going to get there. That's a great way to get there. And like you said, you're not diminishing anything in terms of your ability to vote for somebody
Yeah.
if you
And
really truly want to.
in terms of the electoral college and having, a broader perspective, like if you had the 5 parties and each one of those candidates won a certain number of states, you would have to have an eventual weeding process, because until you have
Yep.
an absolute majority, until you get to 270, I think it is, electoral college votes, then you have to go back and you'd have to look at redoing things, and having the mechanism to having a candidate that reaches the threshold of 270 votes. And even if that situation came down to Republicans and Democrats again and again, there's still that opportunity to have states be involved in, which of the candidates are going to go where, who's going to get picked up
Yeah.
next, after, maybe your preferred candidate doesn't do something, maybe you have a second choice. When you have those opportunities to do those things and you bring the states back into the electoral process, which they basically excluded from, I mean, California doesn't matter.
Right.
It's cooked. I mean, it's baked in to what the results are going to be. Nobody cares. You could vote. You could not vote. Absolutely everybody knows exactly what's going to happen in California. So nobody cares.
Right.
None of the candidates will come out here and campaign. Nobody talks
Right.
to us.
Exactly.
Nobody cares about the largest state population wise in the 48 states. The seventh largest economy in the world has no input into the election. I mean,
Right.
it's insane. So, I
Right.
mean, things like this have to change. Just have to change.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I know it's totally mind boggling. And that's why I said, that's why you need all 50 states, to be swing states for, if no other reason than you do get some representation, even from the big parties, assuming Republicans and
Yeah.
Democrats stay around for a while, knowing that they can't count on California or they can't count on Alabama, depending on
Right.
where you're
Whatever.
flying, that it just becomes a great leverage point to, even if those two parties don't go away anytime soon, which they're not.
Yeah.
It gives you the leverage against them to say, buck up and use a little more common sense on some things,
Yeah.
because I mean, the reality is this is going to be a long process, right? It's not
Yeah.
going to happen. It's not going to happen overnight, but you got to get started somewhere. And again, I see this as the perfect election to start unregistering for the
Yeah.
parties, just to start sending that signal that this can't continue the way it's going.
Yeah.
And because it's only going to get worse. And plus the other part of, if you can start branching out with more options, I think by default, it's just going to start hopefully attracting better candidates. Because I mean, it's, if you're not part of the machine right now, you might be a great person and a great leader, all these kinds of things, but if for whatever reason you're not part of one of the machines, there's no chance.
Right. And
You
I
know?
think, again, the idea of diversity of ideas, I look at the debate that happened, which, I mean, I tried to watch it. It was so awful that I just couldn't get to it.
I
But
watched the whole thing.
God, I feel bad for you. I'm surprised that you're still around to talk about it. But anyway, it's like so few things were actually talked about, and there were so few serious answers by either of the candidates. It's amazing. But if you had more candidates on the stage who could actually have an opinion about things, actually talk about solutions, actually have answers to questions, it would make such a huge difference. And, because if you had a situation where there were more political parties and more states were up for grabs, or at least competitive, it would force you to actually begin to address the problems and the issues that are in the states,
Yep.
rather than just saying, we can just bank on this, for our party, and that's the end of it. I've always talked about this in terms, because we talked, about education and reforming some of the mental health stuff in education. No one's going to fix anything about
No.
the disastrous state of California's educational system. Nobody cares,
Right.
because they know that they're just going to get the votes from California. They're going to get the money from California, and that's the end of it. And they just toss us into the rubbish bin after that. So if you really want to change things, if you ever want to have any kind of a chance about having any kind of a voice in anything that's going on, we need to cut out the whole two-party nonsense and delegate these two parties to the rubbish bin of history, and move on with something better that actually cares about democracy, that actually cares about the people who are supporting
Yeah.
candidates. It's crazy.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of California, I'm with you on that, because so many people kind of, again, it goes back to this whole notion that, hey, if you don't like the thing, like the system, you need to get involved and change it.
Yeah.
And California is such a great example of that. I mean, I know pretty much everybody I talk to, and I intentionally don't bring up politics most of the time, but it just kind of comes up naturally because something happens, and most people are not real happy about it, in particular in California. And in my case, I personally, I love California. I can't imagine living anywhere else, and I'm here for the long haul, and that's just reality. But for everybody else, if you don't like it, my response continues to be two things: either get involved and try and change the system, or move.
Yeah.
And I am a huge supporter, and I've said this a bunch of times, I'm a huge supporter that California lose about 10 million people. Because it would free up traffic, and it would help us with the homeless situation. It would provide so many things. And, you and I have both been in the fortunate situation, I think, to have lived other places. I mean, I've lived in several parts of Arizona, Florida, South Carolina, Virginia, and all those places are lovely, but they go move there.
Yeah.
They all have their problems too. You
Yeah.
think you're going to find some, the whole grass is always greener on their side. It's like, hey, go for it. Go
Yeah.
for it. They have their problems. They may be a different set of problems, but they
Yeah.
have their problems. And so, hey, if you're unhappy, move. If you're unhappy but want to stay here, do something. And a good place, don't keep supporting the two parties.
Yeah. Yeah. No, as I say, I think that there are the idea of people voting with their feet, I think is a good one. But I think, as I say, people voting with their registration, to me,
Absolutely.
is a good way to get started with it because, again, this is a nationwide problem that faces all Americans. I mean, you look at this
Yep.
election, it affects all of us. We cannot continue to go on and just do the same things over and over and over again. But I'm as a person who's advocated for third parties basically my entire adult life. I've talked to so many people, and I get it. They're afraid to take the leap and say, I'm not going to vote for a major party. So there has to be some kind of signal that enough people can see and be like, I can vote for something
Yeah.
other than one of the two major parties. And it does have a chance to accomplish something good, and it will change things for the better. And so I'm always looking for what that signal could be. What is it that could happen that would reach enough people that they would finally say, okay, we need to be done with the duopoly. And I just feel like, if you could get enough people to unregister, like this huge
Yep.
unregistering event wave that went across the country, and people could really get on board with that, that could be something.
So that brings up a good thought. Maybe we need to campaign for is to get Taylor Swift to unregister,
Yeah,
because apparently that gets the most attention.
yeah. Millions of people suddenly realize,
Right? But and get Beyonce to do the same thing, and then also the Kid Rocks of the world on the other side. I don't
right?
know, but unfortunately, we are kind of a celebrity based
Mm.
society these days, and which is a little scary in my mind.
Yeah,
But hopefully somebody with some kind of stature would kind of help lead the process to kind of do that sort of thing. That and it's not that you're against, because when I unregistered a couple years ago, um, at first it kind of felt weird. It was just like, I can't believe I'm doing this, you know, and but once you do, it is such a freeing feeling. I mean, it's like I it was the first time I actually felt something as part of the political process. I
mm,
actually made a difference in my very small, minute way, because I'd kind of given up on the presidential elections because for all the reasons we've talked about, it's like doesn't matter what you vote for. Um, but it's kind of a freeing possibility. It gives you kind of that feeling that, hey, there's other options here. And yet it's almost, well, in California, it's basically zero risk.
yeah,
It is zero risk. It's zero risk in most of the South or Arizona and places like this where Trump's going to, the Republicans are going to win, or throughout a lot of the Midwest, so it's zero risk for most of those states. So it's like, why not? There is
yeah,
literally no downside
yeah,
other than the all the upside of just sending the message that, hey, things have to change.
yeah. And another thing that as someone who's been, a third party advocate literally forever, it's interesting when I hear people talk about how contentious discussions even within families can get, and people lose friends over these discussions. Once you free yourself of the party system, it frees you up to talk to anybody about anything. I mean, if you're a Democrat,
Right?
I'm just an independent guy. You want to talk to me about something, fine. I'll give you my ideas, but I'm not coming in from a quote unquote Republican. position. I'm not a Republican.
Right.
And if you're a Republican and you want to talk to me about your ideas, fine. I'll listen to you. I'll hear what you have to say. We'll have some
Yeah.
discussions because I'm not coming across from a Democrat point of view because I'm not a Democrat. I'm
Right.
just somebody who's interested in trying to find solutions to things, trying to find policies that actually work. And so it really is freeing. You know,
It
you
is.
don't have to fight for one side or the other. You can
Right.
recognize that both sides are terrible and that, maybe something else needs to happen. And I was funny, I was joking with my wife about this. I was saying that I always have something in common with whichever party you belong to, because I hate the Republicans, and if you're a Democrat, we can agree that we hate the Republicans. And I hate the Democrat. If you're a Republican, I can agree with you that I hate the Democrats. So even though you may think I'm a kook, at least we have something in common.
Yeah, no, and that is really true. I have experienced that because it's interesting because it disarms people when you say I'm an independent. I'm not either one. Because if you do go into it, just totally innocently, and you are coming from whatever, you're a Democrat, it puts, and the other person's a Republican, they just automatically assume you're kind of the enemy,
Yeah,
and vice versa. Vice versa. But if you say, yeah, I'm an independent, I kind of just, voting for the person and all that kind of stuff, there's no argument.
yeah,
How can you have an argument?
yep.
You know?
Well, and as I say, coming from the perspective of Californian, where most of the people I know are Democrats,
Yeah.
and most of the time, and I'm like you too, I don't always want to talk about politics every. I
No.
mean, obviously, this is a political podcast, so that's what we spend our time talking about here. But generally speaking, I don't necessarily, spend a lot of time talking about that. But a lot of the conversations are, Trump is awful. I hate Trump. Trump. Because I most of the people I know are Democrats, and I'm like, yeah, sure, Trump, terrible, awful, blah blah blah. And then as soon as you get past all the Trump is awful thing, it sort of becomes okay. So what do you want to do about any of it?
Right.
What do you like about the Democrats? What are
Right.
they doing to solve any problem? But it's
Yeah.
like I don't have to reflexively say I'm defending the Republicans
Right.
because I'm not defending the Republicans. I couldn't care less about the Republicans. As far as I'm concerned, they can all just go away.
Yep.
And so it's like I don't have a dog in that fight. So you want to gripe about how awful you think Trump is for a while, fine. But then after a few minutes of that, we can actually talk about something that matters.
Exactly.
And so when you can come at things from that point of view and you can have a conversation in that manner, you're not alienating people. You're not throwing your friends under your bus. You're not in the camp that they can't ever join because you're not really in a camp. You just want to find solutions to things.
Exactly.
I think that's a healthy way to come from. And as I say, everyone just deregistered.
Right. And oddly, when I do have those conversations with people, most people are generally within the same sphere of just some normal common sense stuff. Right.
Yeah.
And everybody agrees. I don't care what side you're on here in California, that the homeless situation is awful. It's terrible. And nobody's really coming up with any viable solutions. But you still got these two entrenched camps saying one thing or the other. It's like, guys, probably we need a little bit of a lot of things, right?
Yeah.
And so if you get on one side or the other, you're never going to get there. And if the answer is going to be, we're going to spend even more money, or the other answer is, we should just cut all homeless. Well, no, neither one of those are viable answers.
Right.
We've spent a lot of money, and we still need to spend some money. I'm not saying that, but the problem isn't money. The problem is trying to find something that works.
Right.
And you can't have those conversations.
Right. And all the anger and all the mistrust of the other side, whichever the other side may be, is never going to solve anything.
No.
So you have to get past that. And that's kind of what I've always said about California, because the Republican Party is basically a dead entity in California. They don't control anything or do anything anyway. So to even have any kind of discussion or back and forth or moderation of policy or anything, you need to have a new party because the Republicans are a failed entity. Right. And so California's a perfect place to start. Like you were saying, this is the election. This is the time. Let's get the message out that it's time to create something new. And let's do it in California. And
Right.
hell, let's do it in Alabama and Mississippi and other places too. And maybe
Yeah.
the things that get created in the different states aren't going to be the same thing because the states need different things. You
Absolutely.
know, the missing perspective in Mississippi is different than the missing perspective in California.
Yeah.
So what is created in those states would undoubtedly be different, but that's fine. We should have that. We should have
Yeah.
multiple uh, alternatives to multiple things that people can trust, that people can back, that actually have a chance of doing something and having a positive effect. So again, I can't say this enough, and how much I agree with you that this is the time to start.
Oh, absolutely. And the irony of California and Alabama and Mississippi is they are more alike in some ways than they are different, and in specifically around diversity of the populations.
Yeah.
And it's like, of all states that should have more than two parties, it's California, because we have such a just a wealth of diversity in terms of populations and demographics and however you want to measure what diversity is, right? And that just by the sheer definition of the people that live here means, to your point earlier, there's a lot of people that aren't getting represented by either one of the parties in any stretch of the imagination. And that's the opportunity. It's not, if we look at it as an opportunity versus a challenge, it just changes your whole mindset. And the great place to start is don't register for either one of those parties.
Yeah. And one thing that I'd add, just to make a more concrete example, because the irony of this is always amazed me. Two of the worst states for education in the United States, and I think it might be something like the worst state and the second worst state for education, especially per capita, when you're looking at California, is Mississippi and California. We have those two states have some of the worst public education in the entire country, and they couldn't be more different.
Right.
So the problems that are facing the states are probably very, very different, but the
Yes.
results they're getting is the same, which is terrible public education. So
Yeah.
something needs to come along to address that, and it would be different in both states. But
Mhm.
something needs to come along, because to consistently be at the bottom of the barrel for education is just terrible. I mean, it's one thing if like there's this huge cycle, at some point your educational system falls down and it gets to be 49th or 50th in the nation. You take action to fix it and it goes back up. And then some other state becomes 49 and 50th. But California and Mississippi have been down at the bottom of the educational ladder for ages. When is anything going to change that's going to help fix that? You're just abandoning your population to ignorance, and it's terrible.
Right.
But it's not one party or the other, because, as they say, the states are polar opposites.
Right.
But something has to come along and change the captured nature of these states into something that's more free, has more ideas, has more competition, and allows change to actually happen, as opposed to just being the prisoner of one party or the other.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Well, that's a great place to end it, I think. And wrapping it all up, I think we have our marching orders. Hopefully, others will start thinking about kind of taking this step, because now couldn't be a better time to do it.
Yep.
This election couldn't be a better time to do it. And there's in the vast majority of cases, there's absolutely no risk.
Yeah.
So now's the time to do it.
Yeah, no, couldn't agree more. And as I say, it was great to see you yesterday. I look
Yeah.
forward to doing it again, and good discussion today. And we'll do it again next week.
Sounds good.
All right,
Take
talk to you
care.
then.